All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Guy McPherson here. Very excited to have as my guest today, Linda Donovan. Linda, welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So Linda has been leading grief support groups for Hospice of Santa Cruz County for more than a decade. After experiencing how their hospice team provided so much assistance to her family before and after her husband died from cancer, she became very involved as a volunteer with the organization. Linda is the author of several books, Beyond Loss in a Pandemic, Find Hope and Move Through Grief After Someone Close to You Dies, After Loss, Hope for Widows, Widowers, and Partners, as well as co-author of Tech Grief, Survive and Thrive Through Career Losses, which won a Writer's Digest Award. Linda's a firm believer that loss isn't just limited to death, but also the loss of time, experiences, income, and so much more. And it all needs to be recognized as part of a modern understanding of grief. Linda, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently, and then we'll dive in.
How I got started providing grief support?
No, where you are, where you're from originally. Where were you born?
Oh, I'm from the East Coast.
I started out at the beginning.
I'm originally from the East Coast, and now I'm in Santa Cruz, California.
Where on the East Coast? Because that's where I'm from.
I lived in Philly and New Jersey.
Nice. I as well. All right, cool. All right. So, yes. How the heck did you get to this point?
I think I started out as the accidental caregiver. My background was in writing and in marketing and technology. And then in 2005, the day before Thanksgiving, my husband at the time, Paul, was diagnosed with cancer and given less than 6 months to live.
Oh, my God.
And my daughter was in high school at the time. And we did the chemotherapy. We tried that just to see if we could buy some more time. But he did die within 5 months.
Wow.
But we were very fortunate to have hospice care. And
had you known or been aware of what hospice care was?
Not okay. Until the doctor said, well, there's nothing more we can do for you. I think we'll bring in hospice. And I had this image of hospice being a place rather where you go to this room to die. I had no idea of what a wonderful, compassionate support system that they had provided for anticipatory grief, helping my family, the spiritual component, and all of the amazing services that they were able to help Paul and our family during his grief, our grief journey.
Can I just pause you for a second? Well, right, and there are hospice places, right? There are hospices, but you're saying that also hospice workers can come to your home.
They can come to your home. Right. And so with our hospice of Santa Cruz County, I experienced when they sent in someone called, a social worker to come help you through all the paperwork and processes. And it was like a complete burden was lifted.
Of course.
And they were just so kind and compassionate. And I mentioned they are a nonprofit, so they also offer the spiritual care, the spiritual component. And they had nurses would come in and visit, and they had volunteer visitors, and then, ultimately after he passed, they provided one-on-one grief support and group grief support, and they have all kinds of activities to really help you heal, to help the family heal.
Before we get into that, let me ask you something. When this all occurred, and this might seem like an obvious question, but I just want to learn a little bit more about your process, if that's okay. How the heck did you deal with this? I mean, this news. And then your husband's eventual passing.
Like most people, when you get a cancer diagnosis, you say, "Oh, well, it's got to be wrong." They made him that. We're just going to go and check it out a few more places.
And did you?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
And we went to the best of the best, and they validated. Yes, he has cancer, and I mean he had symptoms. But and then it was like, okay, we're going to see what we can do to, we'll try the chemotherapy for a while. And then but in the meantime, when it felt okay, let's make the most of each day. So it may be something as simple as when he could get to the car, going for a ride in the car and looking at the ocean. With hospice care, we had brief periods of time where he felt better and was comfortable. And so it's more like I couldn't believe that there was something in my life that I couldn't control. I couldn't control his death. It was surreal. But I grew to accept it. And what was really interesting was I wrote his eulogy, and I said, I want you to read this and see how you have meaning. And Paul was a writer, and so he looked at what I wrote, and he goes, "Irish it up." He was Irish. I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Make them laugh, make them cry. You need to redo this." And so he edited his own eulogy, but he got to read it and approve it.
That's pretty intense.
And approve it before it was released.
Oh my gosh. Okay, let me ask you, you're speaking very highly of this particular hospice program. What was it specifically that these different people said, didn't do that helped you?
They, it was like, I wrote an article up for my local paper after this called "The Angel at the Door." And when the social worker walked in, she said, "Oh, we're here to help you. You don't have to fill out all this insurance paperwork and deal with all this. You don't have to take your husband to the emergency room in the middle of the night, because if you have a problem, you call us and we'll have a nurse come out and help you." And so it was that kind of care and the spiritual care, and then just kind of put me at ease so that we could make the most of the time that we had.
I mean, that sounds easy. We're going to make the most. I can't imagine. How were you? Were you anxious during this time? Were you, what? I mean, when did this happen?
Well, I tried to just get through each day.
Yeah.
And then, when a volunteer visitor would come stay with him, then I might take a walk or just I go to the gym and run. Just kind of, but I was able to find moments of joy and meaning and read to him and be by his side. And just kind of, it was still surreal.
Yeah. I mean, obviously to be with someone as they're declining is obviously one thing. And then to experience a sudden loss is another thing. When he passed, how did you manage grief? How did you understand grief? What was your understanding of it?
I got help.
You got help.
I did. Well, through hospice, I did one-on-one support. And then later I joined a grief support group.
And what did each of those look like? What is that when you
the one-on-one, I mean, it's hard to imagine because your first 3 months are you're numb. and but I just remember asking basic questions and trying to figure out, well, how am I going to put my life back together? I was working at the time. I had taken some time off and I was able to work from home also. Work was something I could do. And so work, I felt comfortable in my work. Mm-hmm. And my daughter was graduating high school, and he had told her that whether he dies on the day of her graduation or the day of her prom, he wants her to go to either event. And he did. The day of her prom.
Oh my gosh.
And she went.
Wow.
And just kind of compartmentalized the grief until afterwards. But it was like he made her promise that she would go on and just move forward with her life. And I appreciate that.
How do you define grief?
Grief, it's like you have to work through it. You carry it with you, but you can work through it. It's and it hits you at different times. It might hit you like on somebody's birthday, the birthday of a loved one. And in my grief support groups, I told people, I said, look, if the first birthday of the person you died could be a difficult experience because they're not there. And so what I did on Paul's first birthday was I gave him a birthday party after he died. And I said, do that. Bring together friends, people you know, or just someone you know, and share memories and share pleasant experiences and eat their favorite food and laugh. Mm-hmm. And so instead of that being a dreaded event, it turns into something of, I'm going to celebrate this person on their birthday. Did I answer the question?
You did. Yeah. I have felt that to a certain degree, we generally speaking have an expectation of how we're supposed to grieve. I'm supposed to feel this way. I'm supposed to feel that way. Oh my gosh, I'm not doing it right.
Everybody grieves differently. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. And it's, you move at your own pace and you try and do some, do something that makes you feel good each day. Mm-hmm. Try, even though it's difficult, to reflect when you can on something you're grateful for. One of the things that grief helped me deal with is I don't sweat the small stuff like I used to. When I get stuck in traffic, I used to get really angry. Mm-hmm. And I don't do that. If I have a setback in something or something disappoints me, it's like, it's no big deal. Nobody died. And so it gives you a whole different perspective on what's important in life.
How did you work through this with your daughter? You said she was 17 at the time, approximately?
Yeah, she was 17. We got and my stepdaughter is very close to her dad, and we got some grief support. And that was helpful. I know that I started journaling, and that was very helpful. And we talk about it. We talked about this. How do we feel? what would your dad do now? When you when you feel like you need him, what do you think he would tell you in this situation? And just talking about the pleasant memories. And I tell people this in the grief support groups. I said, when you bring up all these positive memories and things that are really special, the images of them being sick and what they look like and what they went through fade. And you remember, eventually over time, you don't even think of them like when they were sick. You think of them when they were healthy and happy.
How did you get to the point, and at what point did you get to the stage where you were like, okay, I want to volunteer. I want to kind of get involved with this.
So he died in 2006, and in 2008, I decided I got to make some meaning out of this. I have to, I have to find something, something to help other people, and so I and some way that he can contribute through me. And so I took grief support, a training, and it's ongoing, and started doing one-on-one and later grief support groups in 2008, and I've been doing it ever since.
Wow. And okay, so take us into one of those groups. What do they look like? Can you share, obviously without giving names and particulars, but can you share with us some of what it's like engaging with people who don't know what the heck is going on with, you know what I'm saying?
You take it, we have different groups. So we had loss of partner groups, loss of spouse and partner groups. We had, drop-in groups. I've done loss of sibling, loss of parent, a mix. You leave a space for them. You check in, you share you let people know it's a safe zone to share. And that it's a private zone when you're there, and you listen, but you also give parameters so that if one person, let's say, has a particular problem that is going to take longer to deal with, you talk to that person, say we're going to get back to you after the session, and we'll explore this one-on-one together, because we have to give everybody an opportunity to share.
What have you found? Have there been certain kind of commonalities that you've discovered from people doing these groups?
What was really amazing, I didn't know how the virtual groups were going to work out. I didn't know how they would connect. And it was amazing to see how these people who met virtually during, difficult times when we were shut down and you couldn't leave your house, or during COVID. And then, as things started opening up, they'd get together on their own as on their own groups, and they'd meet and they became friends. And one of the things I noticed when I years ago is I joined a loss of spouse partner group, and I was suddenly single at the time. All my friends were married. I was living alone. When my daughter went off to school, I was living alone for the first time in my life. I'd either had parents or children or roommates. And it was a big change. And so I got to meet other friends in the group. And I met one very nice friend who we got together. I got together with her for dinner every week, and we had friend therapy. And so I think groups can be very helpful. And I've seen how people work together and create, want to help each other.
Yeah. Excuse me. It's such a incredibly vulnerable time, raw time, that if we have the opportunity to get together with people and realize that we're not alone, and yet we're going through this human process together. And my guess is, and share with me your response to this, or your thoughts on this, but we get together with people at this time and interact with them, engage with them, and share with them unlike any other time, right? I mean, what did you find in terms of how people interacted in the group?
I thought they were respectful of each other, and I'd see how you'd see how someone who was, might be struggling with one problem, and other people would say, well, you know what, you can't drive, I'll pick you up and I'll take you there. And so I was really impressed when I saw that.
One of the things you mentioned, one of the questions I ask of most of my guests is if they could share an early clinical error, but you have a different slant on that. Share that for us, Linda.
Okay. Well, my dad died many decades ago, and it was a sudden heart attack. He was in the middle of, he was on a boat out of the country with my boys who were young, very young at the time. They're grown up now, and they're adults. And he just had a heart attack. My mom was there and a couple other people right there in front of them. And I didn't know my dad had a heart problem. He was young. And so when he died, it was like, okay, when the kids came back, and we just was like, okay, well, this terrible grandpa has died. We're so sad. We're going to miss him. But I didn't seek help. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of went on with my busy life. And I can imagine what, two young boys must have been going through at that time. I didn't know about grief support back then. And for years I was really stuck. I'd want to connect with my dad in my dreams. And I wanted to have this, where is he? Why, I was focused on my own loss, not realizing the depth of what my mother must have been going through, and just everybody else who was impacted by it. And so it took me a long time. I had anxiety and stress. I didn't know where it was coming from, but I think I didn't deal with I didn't have closure with his death. You never truly have closure, but I didn't really work through it because it was such a shock. So then when Paul died, it was just, okay, here are the things you do. You get to say, I got to say goodbye. There was nothing left unsaid, but also I knew that, I got the support that I needed. We got the support we needed for this. So I was great. I was grateful for that. And so I was able to get unstuck.
Thank you for sharing that. So we're talking about a book here, Beyond Loss in a Pandemic, Find Hope and Move Through Grief After Someone Close to You Dies. Why did you write this book?
I had written a couple other books. My first one was about career grief, dealing with, and turning it around when your career changes. It was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross combined with Maslow. And then I did one on loss of after loss, which is to help people work through their loss after they lose their spouse or partner. And by the way, many years later, I remarried. But love, you can find love in many ways. You can reinvent yourself. You can find love in a new career. You can find love in volunteer work. I was grateful that I was able, but I'm grateful that I had that opportunity. And then after people started telling me, well, you wrote after loss but what about the pandemic? The pandemic has changed everything, how people grieve.
Mm-hmm.
And people didn't get to say goodbye to their loved ones. And I had loved ones who I had lost people. I had lost relatives. I had lost during this time period. I had friends who lost who lost their husbands, not necessarily always to COVID,
Mm-hmm.
but they couldn't get the help. They couldn't say goodbye. They were, there was a lot of anxiety. I knew people who it went through whole families, and there was a lot of guilt because, guilt that they might have given COVID to an elderly family member, and all of these things. And people were it was just terrible.
Yeah, that's tragic.
And so I thought, well, okay, so my friends started saying, you need to give people a toolkit, and compassion, and just kind of help them recognize that this is a very difficult time, more challenging than what we've experienced before, and how do we work through it and stay connected and feel better about ourselves, and reduce our stress. And so I talked about ways to do that, and how to set goals and plans, and how to get out there, even if getting out there is just virtual.
Mm-hmm. So just to, if I may interject this, just to be clear, this is specific to the pandemic.
Well, it was beyond loss in a pandemic, but my book is timeless because the guidance can be applied to any type of loss in any time. I do discuss the uniqueness of the pandemic. One thing I did in this book that I didn't do in the other ones is I talked about how your own identity changes with loss.
Mm.
And so your role changes. And so I talked about the different types of loss, whether it's a parent, a spouse, a child, a friend. And I don't really go into pet loss here, but I've also written about pet loss, because we've relied on our pets to help us through this pandemic and other losses. We had fires, we've had floods, we've had economic stress, all of those combined.
This is a culture that typically keeps the topic of death on the periphery. I could assume for obvious reasons, but what's your take on that? And do you see that changing at all?
I think as more people experience loss and they realize like even this pandemic has brought out our vulnerability, that I think there will be more of a focus on it, and more of a focus, and people shouldn't push it aside. You have to work through it, because you're gonna feel it in other ways. So I do think there will be more attention given, especially with all the things that are going on right now.
So for those people who are listening, and a lot of therapists, coaches, survivors listen to this, for those people who maybe are experiencing or have recently experienced a loss, what are some of the things, or maybe a couple of the things you would initially suggest to them or invite them to consider?
Well, I'd always encourage people to get help, whether it's whether it's through a therapist, whether it's through joining a grief support group, or both. I'd encourage them to get help. I'd encourage them to focus on their own self-care. And some people also find a lot of help through spiritual, through their place of worship. But to do not be isolated, try and reach out and find something, recognize that we all go through this, and we will carry our grief with us, but it's a part of you, and but there is light, there is hope, there is light, and there are things you can do to make your life easier. And so you also have to recognize that people don't like to talk about grief, and if you've lost someone and you see your friends and they don't ask you how you're doing, or it's not necessarily that they're ignoring you. They just don't know how to deal with the topic.
Right.
Or they might say, oh, you'll get over it. Or I thought you'd be through your grief by now. And,
right.
They'll make a judgmental statement like that. They're not out to hurt you or anything else. They just don't understand. They won't understand until they've been through it. And so try not to take things personally. No.
I had an experience somewhat recently, and some people were saying to me, my God, how come you're not more, X? How come you're not experiencing more this type of emotion or that type of emotion? And I was like, I don't know. I'm feeling what I'm feeling, and I think it's important to give people permission to honor whatever they're feeling is okay. They don't have to conform to any kind of strict grief protocol, because I think, as you said at the top of this, we go through these, people have their own way, their own timeline, their own evolution of dealing with this. But I think it's important, as you're saying here, to be intentional about going through it, right? Experiencing it rather than shoving it down.
And I think, and one thing I talk about in my book is identifying triggers. Okay. You have to know in advance. Like, for example, a woman I know whose husband died. A month later, she went to a memorial service for someone else's husband who died. And I said to her, you know what? Don't drive there yourself. Go with somebody else and just be prepared that when you go to this memorial service, it may hit you in ways you have no idea, because you will actually be grieving the loss of your husband, that you didn't get a chance to express those emotions when he died.
Right.
And so you have to be prepared for triggers, and even good events like weddings and births. If your loved one is not there to share these wonderful events, you may find yourself crying at them and not knowing why. And it's because you're dealing with some unknowns, and so just I talk about certain things that will be triggers. Your anniversary, your first anniversary, if you're a widow, or Father's Day or Mother's Day if you've lost a parent. So you try and think, okay, I know this may be difficult. I'm going to prepare for it. I may not be able to go back to the same restaurant I went with that person for a while. And familiar places, it may take you time before you can go there and feel comfortable, and just know it's normal.
Right.
It's part of grief.
Linda, thank you so much for joining us today. So the book is called Beyond Loss in a Pandemic, Find Hope and Move Through Grief After Someone Close to You Dies. Where can people pick this up?
They can.
Wherever books are sold.
It's on.
Okay.
They can get it on Amazon or other retailers.
Okay. And I'll have it linked up here at the show notes page, also at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Linda, what is the best way for people to get in contact with you?
They can either go to my website, lindadonovanbooks.com, and DONOVAA.
Okay.
And they can fill out a form, or they can send me an email at lindadonovanbooks@gmail.com.
Okay. Awesome. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And also thank you for continuing to do the work you do. I'm glad there are people like you out there.
I'm glad to be here.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.